The history of the Babylonian Empire is long and storied. In fact, the Babylonian Empire dates all the way back to a name you probably know, Hammurabi, the famous author of Hammurabi's Code, back in 1894 BC. The seat of the Empire of Babylon was located just south of the Euphrates River in what is now Iraq. Throughout the next 1,000 years or so following Hammurabi, Babylon would rise and fall and expand and contract depending on which king was in power at the time, but never really gaining steam or never becoming a force in the global system until King Nabopolassar. Ooh, I almost butchered that one, and I practiced it all morning. King Nabopolassar. Beginning in Nabopolassar in 620 BC, we enter into the era that historians call the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which would reach its full height under a name that we're now familiar with after last week, King Nebuchadnezzar, who happens to be Nabopolassar's son. If we're seeing movies or we're reading books and we're talking about Babylon, and you see a portrayal of Babylon as it used to be, you are going to see it as Nebuchadnezzar built it to be. Under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon becomes the world power that we remember it as. Nebuchadnezzar is responsible for some really incredible construction projects, namely the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Rumor has it, or at least legend has it, that Nebuchadnezzar built these to satisfy a homesick wife of his, who was homesick for a much more lush atmosphere than was provided there south of the Euphrates River. He also oversaw constructions of something called the Ishtar Gate. It's an incredibly lavish passageway that leads through several gates into the heart of Babylon as it used to be, kind of a ceremonial, decorated pathway. You can see parts of the Ishtar Gate at the Met in New York City today. You can go visit it. And also, much of the gate still remains in Iraq. You could go see it, which I think these people are there in this picture. And if this looks familiar, that's because the background picture for the sermon series that I've been using is a picture of a lion from the Ishtar Gate that King Nebuchadnezzar himself built. Babylon was an amazing and incredible and powerful empire. It lasted until around 514 BC, when the Babylonian army was defeated by the Medes and the Persians, which would then usher in the next great world empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medo-Persians controlled this hub of the world until 333 BC, when the Greeks, led by someone you also may have heard, Alexander the Great, conquered that territory and ushered in the next great global empire. The Greeks held control of the area until 116 BC, when the Romans, led by Emperor Trajan, began their ascent and would go on to be, guess what? The next great global empire. Welcome to week 2 of our study in the book of Daniel. We jumped into chapter 1 last week. We learned a little bit of the background of the book of Daniel, what's happening in Daniel chapter 1. And Daniel chapter 1 really opens in a dark place. Jerusalem has been, as we mentioned last week, stuck in between 2 countries or 2 empires that are vying to be the world's great empire, Egypt and Babylon. Jerusalem begins under Egyptian rule, and then they are overtaken by Babylon. They are actually besieged by Babylon, and they fall. Once they fall, the holy items of the temple of God are taken into the temples of the gods of Babylon. Included in this whole trajectory, in this whole overtake of Jerusalem and of the holy city, Nebuchadnezzar decides that he's going to take some of the best and the brightest people away from Jerusalem, and he's going to train them to be Babylonians. Included in this hall are our 4 heroes from chapter 1, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as Nebuchadnezzar renames them, and for some reason we still call them. I always wondered why Daniel got to keep his first name, but we call the other 3 Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But together, they find a way to keep hold of their identity and their faith in God. We learned a few lessons there in chapter 1, but the main takeaway was that God is still working. We often lament sometimes about the state of how the world looks or what is happening here, or even in particular the state of Christianity. Christians don't number what they used to. Churches are dying. People are not coming back to church the way they were before, and we can look at that and say, oh, this is terrible. But then we look at Daniel chapter 1 and say, they faced something that we have never, ever in our lives faced. And God was still working even in Daniel chapter 1, and God is still working now as well. Today we move into chapter 2, a chapter in which King Nebuchadnezzar will have a dream, and he's going to need someone to help him interpret that dream. I think we know somebody. His name is in the chapter as titled for the book that we're going to read here over the next couple of months. And through this process, Daniel is going to teach Nebuchadnezzar, and God is going to teach Nebuchadnezzar some things about himself. And I think through this dream, God is going to also teach us some things about himself. So if you have your Bibles or you have it on your phone or on your iPad, flip over to Daniel chapter 2. We're going to read all the way through Daniel chapter 3, not at one time, but we'll kind of break it up as we go through chapter 2. So if you want to follow along, Daniel chapter 2, and we'll begin in verse 1. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I've had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. So we learn in the first verse there that Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and his mind is troubled. There's a really fantastic Hebrew word that's used there that literally can be translated to mean struck. So almost like a gong. As in Nebuchadnezzar is asleep and he has this dream and he wakes up. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling. You snap awake and your mind is going 100 miles an hour. And this is what's happened to Nebuchadnezzar. He has a dream and he woke up and his mind is troubled, almost like it's been struck by a gong and it's ringing and he cannot go back to sleep. And so the king summons his people, summons his wise men, his astrologers, his enchanters, his magicians. And the implication is he can't go back to sleep. And he calls them right then. He calls them in the middle of the night and says, I need to know what is happening here. They believed that the gods spoke to them through dreams. Spoke to them, and sometimes a lot of these dreams were warnings that something was about to happen, something that they could possibly change. And in that case, the interpretation of the dream needed to happen quickly. Let's get this in the middle of the night. I've got this dream. I can't go back to sleep. Let's call the guys in and let's talk about it and let's see if we can figure it out. Because if there's something that needs to change, we're going to try to avoid this catastrophic ending that might be coming. We're told that the dream troubles him. Apparently, he can piece enough of the dream together that know that it might not be great news. It troubles him a little bit, and he needs to know what's happening in this dream. Verse 4. Then the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. So far, for these people that the king has called in, this is not an uncommon situation. Very oftentimes leaders had dreams that needed an interpretation, and so they're used to this idea, maybe not in the middle of the night, maybe so, but here they are, they're ready. They greet the king with the usual greeting, Good king, live forever. How can we help? Usually, dream interpretation in this day involved two main methods. The first would be called a deductive approach, in which they had a dream book. You may call it a dream interpretation for dummies. So here's this manual, and within the manual are all kinds of images and processes and things that someone might encounter in a dream, and they had written about what they might possibly mean. So they could listen to the dream from the king, consult the book, and figure out maybe what this dream was supposed to mean. The second was a more inductive approach, which was just using kind of communal wisdom and the minds of these people who are entrusted as wise people to come in and help. So they put their heads together, they listen to the dream, and they bounce ideas off of each other and come to some sort of a consensus. This is probably why Nebuchadnezzar calls all of them. He says, I want all heads together on this. I want to know what's happening in this dream. Keep going in verse 5. The king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses burned into piles of rubble. That escalated quickly, right? So They come and they say, okay, great, we're used to this. This is what we do. Tell us your dream. And Nebuchadnezzar throws him for a loop. He says, I'm not going to tell you what the dream was. I want you to tell me what the dream was. And then I want you to interpret it for me. And if not, oh, guess what? I'm going to chop you up and I'm going to burn your houses to the ground. Okay? Tell me what the dream was and interpret it. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. We're now in uncharted territory, right? Again, these guys are used to this scenario, but not in this way, not to this level. Once more they replied, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. I read over that part a couple times, but this makes me chuckle, and I think it's fantastic. They just acted like what he just said never happened. So, yeah, tell us the dream and we'll interpret it. The king says, no, that's not how it's going to work. You're going to tell me the dream, and you're going to interpret it, or else I'm going to chop you up and burn your houses down. And they say, okay, great, so tell us the dream and we'll interpret it. We'll see what happens here. The king answered, I'm certain that you're trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. Nebuchadnezzar calls him out. He says, you're stalling. I know you're just trying to buy time. Go ahead and tell me. You know what the answer is. I've told you what's going to happen. And to be fair, stalling is probably a good tactic at this point. They can tell he's worked up. He's woken up in the middle of the night. His mind is buzzing. And they said, maybe if we just give him a minute, he'll calm down. And then he'll tell us the dream. So let's buy some time here. Nebuchadnezzar says that's not going to work. But for all the shock and trembling and all of the midnight awakening that's happening with Nebuchadnezzar, he seems to be approaching them with this level of reality that he hasn't before. Because he says, if you can't do this, then you've been lying to me this whole time. You've been telling me that you can talk to the gods, that you can figure out these dreams. This is your job. This is what you've been telling me you can do. And now all of a sudden, if you can't do it, then you've been lying to me. You haven't been doing what you said you can do. The astrologers answered the king, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and almighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among the humans. This is impossible, they say. And I love their reasoning. This is like, when your mom makes you fold laundry, and you say, nobody else in my school has to fold laundry. This has never happened before. They say, no king in history has ever asked their wise men to tell them the dream and interpret it. Not going to happen. It's impossible. And maybe for the first time in their lives, they begin to speak a little bit of truth to the king. Because they tell him, no one can do this except the gods. Which again, isn't that their job? To talk to the gods and to get those answers? And at the end of verse 11, they're going to drop this little nugget. A statement that I've read over a lot, but I think plays a really big role in what's going to happen in the rest of this chapter. It's an incredibly deep and incredibly prophetic statement that, again, is going to shape where we go from here. They say, no one can do this except the gods. And then they say, they do not live among the humans. They're not here. The gods don't speak to us like that. They're not present. And they're right. Their gods are not there. Their gods are not present. Their gods are not listening. There is one who is, though. But we're going to get to that in a second. Keep going, verse 12. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all of the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. So we learn that Daniel and his friends are included in this group of wise men. It's not shocking after we studied Daniel chapter 1, and we learned at the end that they were proven 10 times better than every other person that they interviewed at the end of chapter 1. That seems like a pretty wise person to me. So they're included in this group, but for some reason not brought there to the kingdom in the middle of the night to interpret dreams. But they are included in those who, are now on the chopping block. So Daniel, in this moment, once again, in intense pressure, speaks with wisdom and tact. Arioch explains the situation, and Daniel is able to buy them some time. Think about this. This is only possible because of Daniel chapter 1 and the way in which Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah acted with such tact and honor. When they abstained from eating the royal food, they didn't throw fits, they didn't throw their plates on the ground. They asked politely, they were granted a test, they were proven worthy, and then at the end they were shown to be better. And so in this moment, now in the middle of his rage, the king looks at Daniel and thinks, maybe I can trust him. And Daniel says, now hold on a second, give me a minute, and let me see what I can do. And the king agrees. He's going to give Daniel some time to figure out what's going on. Verse 17, then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. We so often talk about the power of prayer and about praying together. We prayed for those names on our list this morning, and we join each other in doing that. And here we have an incredible example of that as Daniel runs back from the king into the house with his friends and says, we need to all hit our knees real quick. We all need to pray about this. We need to pray to God that he will deliver this mystery to us. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. And then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and he said to him, do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him. Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means. The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. I love how Daniel starts with this, because this is the exact same thing that the other magicians also said. The king says, tell me the dream, and then tell me what it means. And they say, nobody can do that. And so Daniel comes before the king, and the king says, can you tell me what it means, and tell me what the dream was, and tell me what it means? And Daniel says, nobody could do that. And you can imagine, almost as he's saying this sentence, Nebuchadnezzar going, I knew it. You guys are just stalling again. This is the same thing I heard from everybody else. But Daniel doesn't stop there. Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. We could just go home on that one and just camp out on that for a little bit. But we'll keep going. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so your majesty may know the interpretation, and that you may understand what went through your mind. Now, this is a huge moment here that we might just blow by if we're not paying close attention. Do you remember the nugget that I said, that incredibly deep thing that they didn't even know they were saying, that the magicians said at the beginning of the chapter? They said that the gods are not here. They just drop in messages when they need something, but they don't interact. They don't listen. They're not paying attention. They're unreachable. They're not here. But here, Nebuchadnezzar lays down and he starts to think about the future, what it might look like, what Babylon will be in 15, 20, 30, 100 years. And God is listening. God is there, and God is paying attention. And as Nebuchadnezzar begins to ponder the mystery of the future, God is going to show him what it's going to look like. Keep going. Your Majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken into pieces, and they became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. So the dream is of a statue divided into 4 distinct parts, each consisting of a different material. And the materials get worse as we go on down. Then this divinely cut rock appears and smashes it to pieces. In fact, not only does it smash it to pieces, but then the pieces become so small that they're blown away by the wind, and no trace of them exists. And then this rock that smashes the statue grows exponentially. In fact, it takes over the whole world. And now for the part that Nebuchadnezzar has been waiting for this whole time. What does this mean? And Daniel will help. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Notice that even there, Daniel still says we, because he wants him to know that it's not him. It's not me who's doing this. It's not my wisdom. We will interpret it to the king. Your Majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a 4th kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture, and they will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God in heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but itself will endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. So God tells Daniel that the parts of the statue are different kingdoms that will rise and fall, beginning with Babylon itself, represented by the gold head. After Babylon will arise another empire, slightly worse than the one before. This would be the Medo-Persian Empire. After them will arise yet a third, the Greek Empire. And finally, the one that would rule them all, the Roman Empire. 4 global powers, 4 empires, 4 of history's greatest kingdoms. All fall. All gone. But there is a 5th kingdom, one that is not included in the statue. It comes from outside the statue. It is brought divinely, not by human hands. And all kingdoms crumble in the presence of this, the 5th kingdom, a kingdom that will never fail, and unlike the others, will endure forever. We'll finish it out. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor, and ordered that an offering of incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods, and the King of kings, revealer of mysteries, for you are able to reveal this mystery. Then the king placed Daniel in high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him a ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all of its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained in the royal court. God is going to use Daniel, and God is going to use this dream to teach Nebuchadnezzar something about himself. And God is going to use Daniel, and God is going to use this dream to teach us something about himself. As we reflect on chapter 2, there are 3 things that we can take away from this section of Daniel. Number 1, God is perceptive. God knows what's happening here. Not just now, but also in the future. Not just for Nebuchadnezzar, but what's happening today. God sees the rising and the falling of kingdoms. God knows who's coming and who's going, who's coming in and who's going out. And God is not afraid, and God is not surprised by it. God is perceptive. God sees what's happening. Number 2, God is present. The magicians tell King Nebuchadnezzar that their gods are not here, and they were right. They weren't. But Daniel's God was. And Daniel's God is. He is present. He is seeing. He is hearing. He is answering. He is the revealer of mysteries. The magicians are distraught because only the gods can reveal this information, and they say they don't live with humans. They don't live here. They don't live with us. And God says, oh, but I do. I am. I am here, and I'm listening, and I'm present. So present is God that when Nebuchadnezzar, a pagan king, reclines in his castle and he begins to think about the future, God says, oh, you want to know about the future? I'll show you. I'll show you what's going to happen. God is here. God is present. And thirdly, God's kingdom will prevail. God is perceptive. God is present. God sees what's happening, and he's not surprised, and God is not scared. Why? Because God knows that his kingdom is coming. No kingdom on earth can withstand it. No military power can sway it. Not even the most powerful military on earth will be able to resist the coming of God's kingdom. It is not built by human hands. It is not made by human will, and it's not rooted in human wisdom. Its coming is inevitable. God's kingdom is here, and it will never end. The Babylonian Empire was the stuff of legend. We still marvel at things like the Hanging Gardens and the Ishtar Gate, but the Babylonian Empire is gone. It doesn't exist. Following them rose one stronger than them, the Medo-Persian Empire. It does not exist anymore. Following them, they were conquered by the Greek Empire, led by one of the most famous conquerors in history. The Greek Empire does not exist. Following them was the Roman Empire. Rome is a place we go now to drink coffee and look at the relics of the last great empire on earth, the ruins of them. The Roman Empire does not exist. Every earthly kingdom has a shelf life. They come and they go. They rise and they fall. But the 5th kingdom, God says, God's kingdom, is eternal. In which kingdom will we put our hope? And in which kingdom do we put our trust? If we could pray for you this morning, please come forward and find me as we stand together, and Josh will lead us in one more song.